So picking up where the last Discovery tour had left off, I'm doing Wine of Egypt. That is this one right here. Wine in Ancient Egypt. Production and storage in Ancient Egypt.
Welcome to Wine in Ancient Egypt. When the god Horus lost his eye in a war with Seth, the ancient Egyptians believed the eye turned into a vine, and the vine's tears became wine. Early texts, dating back to 3150 BCE, contain the hieroglyph for vine. Regarded as extremely valuable, wine was highly sought after by the elite. It was also an essential part of many religious ceremonies. A millennia-old tradition. Grape cultivation and wine production was regimented in the way typical of ancient Egyptian bureaucracy. Egyptians kept careful records of winemakers, which they clearly identified on labels. Every landowner with a modicum of self-respect usually kept a vineyard. This held particularly true in the regions of the Fayum and the Nile Delta.
So having your own private vineyard to make small batches.
Documentation shows that only certain craftsfolk were allowed to provide the containers required to store and transport wine. That and rigorous quality control checks established for every step of wine production shows that ancient Egyptians knew that the quality and longevity of wine could easily be affected by any number of variables, which they paid careful attention to. Egyptians had different kinds of wines, most of which ranged in quality from good to very good. The sweet shadé, to which honey had been added. The soft nejem, obtained by drying the grapes in the sun. The ma, reserved for religious ceremonies. And finally there was the peor, the mediocre red wine, resulting from the second pressing of grapes and reserved for a less discerning palate.
So beer wasn't the only contribution. The honey wine sounds good. And oil.
Welcome to Oil in Ancient Egypt. Castor, sesame, and moringa were the source of the most common oils in ancient Egypt. Oil was used for various purposes: cosmetics, medical treatments, nutrition, perfume, athletics, and rituals, to name a few. The team decided to use oil as an explosive to add more gameplay opportunities for the player. Ancient Egyptians originally used castor oil in wick lamps, but also for cosmetics, such as facial and hair treatments. There is mention in some papyrus of castor oil being prescribed to treat constipation and help pregnant women. Castor beans were found in ancient Egyptian tombs as early as 4000 BCE. Castor oil was made by pressing the beans from the plant of the same name.
That's one of the presses, I think, with the liquid being in the, what you basically press from it, if I'm reading this right. The press being in the center.
Olive trees were present, though scarce, in ancient Egypt's early history, and olives were mostly imported from Syria and Palestine. Their use and cultivation remained uncommon until the mass arrival of Greek settlers during the reign of the Ptolemies, when demand increased sharply. Olive trees were normally found in the region of the Fayum and the lands surrounding Alexandria.
Oh, so you can go to it individually. Romans up here. Maybe I shouldn't fast travel like that. One way to actually see the map by traveling from station to station. aqueducts.
Welcome to Roman Aqueducts. Water management was taken seriously by the Romans. Cyrenaica benefited greatly from Roman administration with the construction of aqueducts and canals. The source of water varied depending on the location. Many aqueducts were built at the foot of the mountains, offering greater flow from the melting snow. The ability to transport water over a greater distance increased agricultural production. Some aqueducts were reported to be over 7 kilometers in length. Where the Greeks of Libya originally focused mainly on olive trees and figs, which required less water, the advent of Roman aqueducts allowed for a far greater crop diversity. Every farm's water use was carefully scheduled. The engineering methods used to create aqueducts were constantly reviewed, with a clear focus on exploiting the local environment. Materials, water usage, cleaning regulations, and a deep understanding of how to exploit gravity itself were all important concerns. Several fortresses were built to protect the aqueducts, basins, and cisterns.
Well, they would be strategic places of importance. Take the aqueducts, you can control the region. Ugh. You can basically stems from controlling the water supply. Water being even more important than food. You can live a lot longer without food than you can live without water. Granted, it won't be pleasant, but you can live a lot longer.
Additional water was collected with wells and cisterns, but aqueducts were the main supply of fresh water. The water was distributed based on the collective needs of the city, before the private needs of an individual. Almost all aqueducts ended in a fountain where the water circulated to clean the streets and supply bathhouses and latrines, thus improving the cleanliness of Cyrenaica's cities.
You want to keep the health of the city right, you need to pay attention to how clean the city is. Military encampment and forts. No military equipment. Let me try one thing. Yeah. Can't be injured. Oops. So you could leap off any of these high places and you're not gonna take any damage. And this is one of the ways into the fort, by the way, from the main game. So we're meant not to do that. There's thing where you destroy oil mission. Military equipment.
Welcome to Roman military equipment. The strength of Rome was directly dependent on its military supremacy and fundamentally militaristic society. Regular citizens, comprised mostly of farmers and herders, joined to protect their land and families. In return for their service, members of this civic army were allowed to vote. Trained to be highly disciplined and obedient to superior officers, citizen soldiers developed a deep sense of loyalty to their city. The quality of the armor of a Roman foot soldier was intrinsically linked to his social status and wealth. Chainmail was the most commonly used type of armor. Scale armor, made famous in today's media, came into use after Caesar's time. Foot soldiers carried large and oblong shields, while the cavalry used smaller ones of Greek origin. Soldiers were expected to carry their own kit, including the tools required for the construction of forts and tents.
And they always adapted their, not just their equipment, but also their tactics based upon who they faced in the field, especially afterwards. They always learn from their defeats, and they always learn from their victories. That is one of the major things about the Roman Empire and the Roman military. that you don't usually say about all types of armies at the time. They were very adaptive.
Roman soldiers used the same types of weapons. The stomach and face were the most targeted parts of the body. As such, a legionary was equipped with two close combat weapons, a dagger and a short sword, known as a gladius. One of the most ingenious Roman weapons was the javelin. Its pyramid-shaped tip pierced the body, while its iron shank was designed to break upon impact, stopping the enemy from throwing it back.
All their weapons too are designed to fight certain type of foes as well, to deal with certain types of armor. That's why you had that javelin being designed the way it was designed, specifically to handle certain situations. The shield, the sword. All of it to, well, it's a cycle. Develop a weapon, develop the armor to handle the weapon, then you develop a weapon to handle the armor that you develop to handle the weapon.
During their conquests, the Romans regularly transformed enemy technologies to add to their own formidable arsenal. After capturing a Carthaginian vessel, the Romans adopted its better features and constructed a superior fleet of ships. Adapting heavy artillery designs from Greek models aided the Romans in building catapults and ballistae. The latter became an iconic symbol of Roman warfare.
Again, that's that adaptation. They learned from everything, and then they took it in and made themselves stronger because of it. This was not necessarily a common practice, and is one of the ways that Rome outpaced those around them in terms of technology. And what they said about Carthage is one of the major reasons why Rome beat Carthage in the end, despite the fact that Carthage started out their wars with a much better navy and really with many advantages. Rome took what it learned from the Carthage and used it against them, basically. Leading to their defeat.
Welcome to the forts of Cyrenaica.
One of the things the Romans also learned was standardization. In other words, doing a specific thing repetitively enough until you become an expert at it. And many of those you see in how they set up their forts, both permanent fort structures and temporary structures where a legion would camp for the night, with that camp being set up the same way every single time.
Cyrenaica was a Libyan region under Roman control, gifted to Rome by one of Cleopatra's ancestors. The remains and foundations of ancient fortifications were discovered in the 19th century in the southwest of Cyrenaica, as well as a Roman garrison dating back to the 1st century CE. Evidence shows that these forts were of Libyan origin, rebuilt and modified by Roman engineers when Cyrenaica was part of the empire. Stone was the most commonly used material to build forts in Egypt and Cyrenaica. Though no real proof of a fortress similar to the one before you has been uncovered in that region, the team chose to add it as a worthy and awe-inspiring end-of-game challenge for the player.
It is consistent with what the Romans would have done, I suppose, for a stationary fort. Large one. A very large one. This one is a converted one.
The forts of Cyrenaica were intended to prevent invaders from gaining access to the main route that led to the country's 5 most important cities. These forts were built close to coastal plains and deserts for added defense. 3 of these cities were recreated by the team: Balagrae, Apollonia, and Cyrene. Had it existed, the fort before you would have protected the road leading to Balagrae.
Desert for defense, because basically it would be a nightmare to try to get an army across the desert, especially considering logistics.
Other than reference to an attack around 404 CE and a military reorganization by Emperor Justinian during the 6th century CE, we still know little of the Roman military presence in Cyrenaica.
Which, given the Romans, could mean loss of records, I suppose. Or it was relatively quiet. Being relatively quiet sort of does make sense. This is kind of a fun fort. There's another nice fort as well. That's right, you still have Sinew. And you can use this to scout as well. This was a horrible thing to have happen to you. Crucifixion. The thing is, with this, they typically died of asphyxiation. Basically having your arms and legs stretched outward like that made it difficult for them to breathe, among other factors as well. Which means they basically suffocated. One of those wooden things. That's what happened before they dehydrated or starved. And they might even go in on to a bit more detail on that one. Yep. Called it.
Welcome to Crucifixion. In terms of the severity of Roman justice, crucifixion was at the top of the list of corporal punishment, followed by death by fire and decapitation. The upper class considered crucifixion unworthy of their position. Those lucky enough to have Roman citizenship were also exempt from such treatment.
Keynote there.
Easily accessible, crucifixions were popular entertainment among the citizenry. Unlike throwing victims to wild animals, which required an arena, crucifixions did not require any particular setting.
Basically, all you need is wood and rope.
Those subjected to crucifixion were almost always slaves, traitors, and lower-class citizens. Roman deserters were crucified because the betrayal of the soldiers was perceived as endangering the lives of Roman citizens.
You see a common one right there. The ones you see by the roads aren't necessarily, well, some of them are. What the symbol that became a cross is not the common one. It would have most likely been this one. Looked like a T if they had used this form. But you also have the X1, which is represented right here. Both legs spread out, both arms spread out. You'd asphyxiate on that one. Unable to breathe very easily. It's not that you wouldn't be able to breathe at all, it's just that you wouldn't be able to breathe easily. And it get harder. It would get harder and harder and harder until you asphyxiated, so it's slow asphyxiation. I like strangulation, which they did to captured. Captured generals. There was one that Julius Caesar did when he brought him back to Rome, who was strangled. That would have been faster than this.
In 71 BCE, a major slave uprising in Italia was repressed by the Roman army. This resulted in the crucifixion of 6,000 men, including their leader, a slave and former gladiator known as Spartacus.
And a lot of people know that from the movie, where basically they asked who was Spartacus, and the soldiers around him all said, "I am Spartacus." They didn't go into as much detail as I thought they were going to go into, but that sort of the gruesome side of it, as I said, the asphyxiation really is not very pleasant, to put it bluntly. Yeah, there's one more Roman one. And it's kind of amazing, the map design for this game. I can't wait to see how Odyssey turns out because of this, since it seems like this game and Odyssey were developed at the same time. It's interesting watching those birds and how they work with those NPCs in terms of animals, animal behavior, and all of that. I believe that's Sinew right there, flying around. Which you can look up and you can see Sinew in the sky several times, usually flying around you, fairly close by. Roman forts. It looks like this one might go over the temporary structures, maybe.
Welcome to Roman forts. The size of a Roman military camp, known as a castrum, varied significantly depending on how many soldiers it needed to accommodate. However, they all shared common characteristics in design and construction, such as this fort before you, located in Cape Chersonesos.
Yeah, that standardization is so they could set up and break down camps and forts easily, because they would build it the exact same way every single time they did it, which leads to troops knowing how to set it up incredibly fast. Which is a major advantage if you're on the march.
Rectangular in shape, the forts were heavily fortified by ramparts and a ditch system. The walls were reinforced with parapets, essentially an extension at the roofline which allowed a protective barrier for patrolling soldiers. Depending on the availability of materials, some forts were built with stone, timbers, stacked turf, and particularly in the eastern part of the empire, baked brick.
What it's made from varies, but the design is pretty much the same. And all of it to enhance defenses. And protect the most valuable commodity. That being the troops.
Access doors on all four sides were each flanked by guard towers. The commanding officer was positioned in the middle of the camp, giving him a clear view of the troops and the main gate.
For command and control situations. All of it to help the commander to control their army a whole lot better, to deal with whatever decided to actually attack them, and to respond to situations quickly.
Along with sleeping barracks for the soldiers, the fort also had a granary that was expected to hold rations for a year or longer. To ensure the health of the soldiers, every camp was equipped with medical staff and a hospital. A clean water supply with conduits for a bathhouse and latrines was included in the construction of every fort.
That attention to detail made the Roman army incredibly dangerous. More so than other armies at the time. When Rome fell, it wasn't because of the lack of capability of the troops. Next, Egypt itself. And I had the Cyrene up here. This right here, these fields would have been to make oils and various other, not just for looks, let's just put it that way. So oils, food, oils being used for medicine, nutrition as well. Just like I said in the one of the tours, the storage and construction, or creation, storage, and use of oils in Egypt. You can get one horse out here, which is pretty nice. And one of the missions is to rescue that horse after it's stolen or confiscated, which basically is stolen. Major sources of economic wealth.
Welcome to Major Exports of Cyrene. Cyrene's main source of economic wealth was in the cultivation and export of poppies and silphium. Though the opium oil from the poppies was also an export, little is known about this crop. Information about the cultivation of silphium, however, is more accessible to us. Silphium, with its yellow flower, was considered a gift from the sun god. Grown solely in this region near the Mediterranean Sea, silphium extract was exported at high prices and was so crucial to the wealth of Cyrenaica that it was depicted on their coins. Silphium's roots produced a resin used by both the Greeks and Romans in medicines intended to cure cough, fever, indigestion, and many other ailments. It was also used as a contraceptive. In a compilation of culinary recipes from the 4th century BCE, the herb is mentioned in various recipes, including a flamingo dish. High demand, overexploitation, and possibly a shift in climate all contributed to the eventual extinction of silphium. The last mention of it dates from the 4th century CE, and to this day, no traces of this plant have been identified.
Now into Cyrene itself. It's one of the 2 gladiatorial arenas that are in this game. The other one in Crocodilopolis. And I'm not sure I pronounced that right.
Welcome to the Gladiator Arena. While gladiators would not perform in Cyrene until later in the Roman era, the team decided to include a gladiatorial arena for two reasons. First, they believed it was important to portray this aspect of Roman life. And second, they felt it would add interesting gameplay possibilities.
So yeah, this is really out of... This wouldn't have happened during the time of Bayek. It would have happened much later. In Cyrene, that is. And I believe also Crocodilopolis as well. I'm bungling that one.
The first gladiators to enter the arena were prisoners of war. It was a spectacle of violent clashes between men and against wild beasts that lasted nearly 1,000 years. Eventually, volunteers began to enter the ring. For status and money, many of the more skilled combatants increased the quality of the entertainment. Thus, the profession of gladiator came to be. Bound by contract to the master of the gladiators, the fighters were fed, trained, and guarded in barracks. Gladiators were separated into heavy and light armored fighters, each with their own set of specific armor and weapons. Organizers often had two audience-favored factions face each other in combat.
It's like many sports now have a lightweight and heavyweight. It's not so different here.
The events were highly organized. Fights were held with a background of music and supervised by a referee. Death, either in the course of combat or by decision, was not always the only way out for the loser. Several were released due to their performance and gained great notoriety as celebrities.
That's probably what would surprise a lot of people, is how popular the gladiators were and how the gladiators would have, many would have been seen as celebrities of their time. Especially the very good ones. Which you see that in one of the missions in Crocodilopolis. Well, I'm gonna bungle that one again. Where the other arena is. The story of one of those aging gladiators is played out. And it is a pretty interesting mission.
Welcome to the Agora and Thermal Baths. Cyrene's Agora was the public marketplace and political hub of the city. Its central courtyard was open to the sky, while market stalls and shops ran along the sides, some neatly tucked away under long-roofed colonnades. As in other Greek cities, the Agora included a central hearth, known as a Prytaneum. This place served as Cyrene's official embassy where guests were welcomed to the city. An unnamed statue representing naval victories was the centerpiece of the Agora. The statue's female figure likely represents Nike, the goddess of victory. It was likely very similar to the victory of Samothrace, which currently resides in the Louvre Museum and served as a reference for the team.
Πολύδατε, 76 έργων ερήματος, begivon mellin, άξετε την πόλη, είναι αμοβολέων.
The Cyrene Agora also displayed many temples and monuments, celebrating its founding king, Batos, and the city gods. There were 2 altars associated with the Temple of Apollo, and a marble statue base dedicated to the goddess Libya.
Εάν μη άκουσον δύναστε, απάντησόν μη. Ευδαιμονείς, οτάς.
The civic buildings included a law court complete with an archive library that would have housed legal documents and other papers essential to the city's governance. Traces of fire damage to the building's remains indicate that it was possibly destroyed during the rebellion of the Jewish community in 115 CE. Public baths were common in Roman and Greek cities, and Cyrene held true to this tradition. 2 thermal baths from different eras were discovered among the ruins. An inscription at the entrance of one of the baths is presumed to be attributed to the owner. It dates the building to the Hellenistic period.
Μάλακε.
Mosaics were originally created for practical reasons, the need to waterproof floors. Imported by Greeks in Egypt and Cyrenaica, the designs represented either scenes from daily life, marine fauna, or mythological figures. In addition to traditional Greek motifs, they also integrated concepts specific to Egyptian culture, such as the Nelumbo. The best examples of mosaics recovered to date, however, come from Alexandria. The Cyrene baths were fitted into an underground tomb dated somewhere between the 8th and 6th century BCE. Bath seats were carved directly in the rock, allowing for more comfortable ablutions. As with many of the public buildings, the thermal baths were elaborately decorated. Statues such as Aphrodite and Eros the Archer were discovered within. The Frigidarium, a pool of cold water, was the first room visitors entered. It was followed by the Tepidarium, or tepid water area, and then the hot water room called the Caldarium.